Henry and the Acorn Cups. Henry was flying. Well, not actually in the air, but life had been so good. He felt as though he was soaring above treetops in the ocean blue. It was all because of his brilliant acorn cup idea. A little thought that had grown like a great oak tree into a huge success. 2 years before, he had been pelting his friend Stoat with acorns and being pelted back. The Battle of Acorn Valley, they called it, an annual event. Once the acorns started flying, all the other animals joined in, and the air grew dark with the flying missiles. That night, nursing his bruises, he was twiddling an acorn that had made its way into his pocket. Its little cap had rolled into his palm, and the brainwave had come. He could gather all the caps from the forest floor, paint them in bright and beautiful colours, and sell them as drinking cups. So popular had this become that he was working night and day producing them, and had become very rich in the process. But that was not all that he had become. Owl noticed it first. "Henry, you're just not yourself." Then Fox grumbled. "Henry has become so rude." The mutterings grew until a regret descended on the forest like a winter's mist. Henry dismissed all the tittle-tattle as nonsense. He felt exactly the same as he had always done. It was true that he was clever, successful, and now rather wealthy, but none of that had changed him. He was still the same lovely Henry. But was he? He was irritable with his mum, quick-tempered with his sisters, and careless of his friends. Sometimes he didn't even bother replying, or even looking. There was no time any more for him to call on his aged aunt or his ailing neighbour. Then one day he was rushing to take a large order of acorn cups to the weasel, who wanted them delivered by midday. He had 10 minutes left to get there. Perfect timing, he thought to himself. Not a moment wasted. But as he scampered down the bracken bank, he heard a cry for help. "Help me! Please, please, help me!" The plea came to him like an unwelcome wasp threatening his day, and he managed to swat it away quickly and hurried on. That evening, snuggled up in his favourite armchair, he sat, sipping an elderflower cocktail and counting out the money the weasel had given him. He had saved up enough now to move away from the forest and begin a new life in a better home. The following morning, he called on his mum to break the news. But she wasn't in. He called at his sisters, but they were out too. "Haven't you heard?" said a snail, lazily slithering across the path. "Your mum's in hospital. She had an accident yesterday, and no one found her until the evening." A thought too terrible to imagine tried to creep into Henry's mind. But it was so awful, he just wouldn't let it in. It was persistent, though. It kept hammering at the door and protesting, until finally Henry gave in. As he sat beside his mum's bed, holding her hand and watching her breathe, his sisters explained that it had all happened by the bracken bank, and that their mum had called out to someone for help, but whoever it was had just passed on by. They just didn't know how someone could have been so cruel, so heartless. That night, Henry looked at himself in the mirror and was so ashamed. He had become a monster without knowing it. He needed to allow the shame to reach every corner of his body and soul. As it found the last little nooks and crannies, Henry felt more dreadful than he had ever felt before, and knew that this was the rock-bottom place. He never wanted to go there again, and resolved to change his ways. He had a lot of explaining to do, apologizing, putting right, and making new decisions. In time, a forest cooperative produced the Acorn cups. It meant lots of Henry's friends could share the benefit of his great idea, and all of their lives improved. The forest gained as well, because every year the profits paid for exciting new things that everyone could enjoy. You have to be very careful with money, mused Henry to himself. You must make sure it brings happiness to others, and not just yourself, or it so often leads to misery.